family, family sort of commitments that are either kept or broken. So that idea of covenant comes up again and again. So that's the genesis of the title.
Was it a hard title to come by? Did you come across it? I know it took you 14 long years to write this book. So, did the title come across naturally? Did you spend a lot of time debating? Was there a lot of back and forth?
Yeah, there actually was. I mean, for most of my other books, I had the title even before I started the book. But for this one, we had several working titles, and then when the book finally came together, I'm not the sort of writer who knows the whole story, so it was only when I was done that we, sort of could see that this title, Covenant of Water, would capture the main elements of the book. And again, as I said, I think titles should be a bit of a tease. They should be provocative, without really explaining too much. And there comes a point when the reader gets to places in the book and they say, okay, I see why it's called The Covenant of Water.
You've dedicated the book to your mom. Now, how much of these places are from your real life? For instance, there's Parambil, there is St. Bridget, there's the Estates, there's Scotland, there's these places are characters, they speak so loudly of the land, they have their own trajectory in the book. Are these all inspired from your real life? Have you been to all these places? Are they part of your imagination? Did your mom help you see this?
Well, so all the places you mentioned, Parambil and the estates are pretty much fictional, but they're based on things that I either know or have seen. The genesis of the book was very much inspired by my mother. When my mother was in her 70s, her namesake, her granddaughter, my niece, asked her when she was 5 and my mother was in her 70s. She asked her, Amachi, what was it like when you were a little girl? And my mother, who grew up in Kerala, studied there, taught in Sri Lanka, taught in Africa for so many years, and then at that point in her life was retired from teaching in America. My mother was just taken away by that question, and she began to write longhand in a notebook about 100 pages of memories of her childhood. She was also a very good artist, and so she began to illustrate these things. And so this document became a really treasured thing in our family. But I didn't think of it as a book till much later, when my mother was in her 90s and I had finished another project. I picked up that manuscript and I thought, this is just the perfect place to set another novel. I think geography is character, and picking a geography like Kerala makes this a very different story than if I'd picked it anywhere else. So I was drawing on a lot of my memories. I was drawing on a lot of research. I've certainly spent time in Kerala. Every summer vacation, we would come to my mother and father's place, which is, near Tiruvalla, and also my father's place was in Mana, right near Paramilla Church. And so I was drawing on my childhood memories. I was drawing on my mother's notes. I made several visits to Kerala expressly to research the book. I spent time on an estate in Wayanad, not far from where your conference is. And so, it's all fictional, but like most fiction, you want to create a feeling of truth, of verisimilitude, of accuracy. So it's all made up, but it's all very much based, I hope, on a kind of realism that the reader identifies with, especially in Kerala.
Now, in this book, everyone converses very easily with ghosts, and they seem to be a part of the setting. Is that something that you believe in, the paranormal and the conversation with ghosts? Do you believe them to be part of life? Is that how it is? Is that how it was when you were growing up?
Well, I'm not sure that I either believe or converse with ghosts, but certainly both my grandmothers, their discussion of the supernatural, whether the formal religious beliefs, or the beliefs about spells and ghosts was very concrete. I mean, to a little child, it was actually a bit, a bit scary almost, because to them these things were concrete. There was such a thing as a house being overtaken by a ghost, and having to have the priest come and say prayers and try and get rid of these spells. So I must say I was very taken with that as a child. It seemed very real to them, and therefore real to me. So I think it was typical of that age, and maybe it's still typical. I don't quite know.
In today's times, when you talk about ghosts, people may not actually really believe it, or they might allude it. They want scientific explanations. So when you place a character like Jojo's real mother, I'm trying to not give away too many spoilers. Please excuse me if you haven't read the book already. When you place a character like Jojo's mother, and she is an integral part of the book, how do you think people today relate to something like that? Because you're talking about your grandmom's times, right?
Yeah, I think, hopefully the reader accepts that this was the reality of the 1900s. I mean, this is a very early period in our history, and I hope the reader, takes it as being the truth of that moment, of that novel, and it seems to me that they have. I think one of the blessed things about India in general is that, we seem to have one foot in the secular world and one foot steeped in mythology and history and religion. They're all sort of wrapped up, and I'm always impressed with that. I think living here in America, we're much more caught up in the day to day. But when I was a medical student and a college student in India, I was very struck by but that people have very rich spiritual lives. Sometimes, especially when you're impoverished and you have very little material stuff, that sort of spiritual fantasy world, if you like, is very, very rich. I think it explains some of the success and popularity of Bollywood, for example. I think people love entertainment that takes them out of the now, either into the mythical and the historical, or the frankly fantastical. So I think I was trying to capture that sense of people living in two worlds, so to speak, which was very typical of my grandmother and to some extent my mother and my father. My father's still alive. He's 97. He's in really good health. And, to him, religion and, all these matters of faith are very, very concrete. They're not abstract things. For example, I said to him some time ago, I said, Dad, the book is doing really well. I think Mom is watching over this. Mom is interceding. And I was saying it sort of a tongue-in-cheek thing. I wasn't being concrete. But my father's reaction was, of course she is. She is watching, She is the one making this happen. And, it's that sort of concreteness of faith that I admire, I envy. And I think it's very true of certain generations before us. Maybe less true of us now, but not entirely so.
In fact, it brings me to my next question, which is like, there is a lot of faith in the book. All the characters are moved by faith at one time or the other. Are you personally heavily moved by faith yourself? Is this an outpouring of your faith into the book as well?
No, not really. I try very hard not to be a proselytizer. I'm not advancing a religion or advancing a cause. I was simply trying to be true to the times. I think the faith of both my grandmothers was so extraordinarily impressive. For example, in my father's house, my father's mother was widowed very early. She had lost her oldest son to rabies. He'd been bitten by a dog, my father's oldest brother, at 16. And every night we had formal prayers, which is, not something we did in my house with my parents when I was growing up, but with my grandmother every evening. We had a formal prayers at a certain hour. It went on for half an hour. And when it was over, my grandmother would be sort of quietly praying for the departed on her knees on the mat in her room. And she would begin sobbing every single night. She would be sobbing until my father or someone said, "Ah, Madhyamachi, Karakam," and it just struck me how much she lived in that world of the departed and God and religion. And so I think I was just trying to be true to the people of those times, especially in the particular faith I was describing. I wasn't really advancing my own religion. I mean, I think I'm spiritual. I believe in the religion I believe in, but not as I think my faith comes far short of the kind of thing that I saw in my grandparents.
But you also talked about something like the Ministry of Healing and being a doctor and what it's like to treat people. And there is an example of the ideal doctor in most of the doctors that have been depicted in the book, barring Claude, I think, who's really an out and out villain. Do you see that in today's world? Is that the ideal you'd like to represent as to how a doctor should really be and look at it as a ministry of healing, really, instead of just treating patients?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, in modern medicine, it's very easy to forget that you're dealing with another human being. You're not dealing with a number or a disease or a data point. One of the characteristics of any of us when we are ill is we become slightly infantilized. We badly need another human being who has the skill to say effectively, even if they don't say it, but they say it in their manner and their being with you, that, I will be with you through this. I will see you through this. We don't get that kind of satisfaction from dealing with a healthcare system. We do need individuals. And the old term for physicians was the Ministry of Healing. I mean, we're not dealing with an automobile engine where you just replace parts. You're dealing with human beings with very, very complicated emotions, different beliefs about healthcare. So, an American physician, William Osler, said a long time ago, and I think it's very true. He said, "It doesn't matter what disease the patient has, what matters is what patient has the disease." So, the disease is one aspect of it, but it's the human being who has it that matters. For example, in that same generation of my parents, I knew a priest, a very educated man. He'd been in Geneva at the World Council of Churches, and when he got an illness that was potentially fatal and yet treatable, or at least manageable, he declined medical care. He just felt, this is my time. God is ready to take me. So that's a great example. I mean, that very same disease in our generation, I suspect our attitude would be, do everything you can. So medicine is very much an art and a science, and I think we delude ourselves if we start to behave as though it's just science. It's very much about human beings, and you need the same sort of wisdom and ability to connect that I think an imam or a priest or a rabbi needs. You need some sense of human wisdom, human understanding that is as important as the science that you also know.
Did the idea of the condition strike you from your medical history, or did you read about it somewhere? How did you decide to? I mean, it is called the condition in the book, and Bigamati then presents it to be the condition. So, how did the idea of the condition strike you?
Yeah, I was setting the novel in Kerala, and I also wanted to, sort of emphasize the fact that when you have a large community or a relatively small community that intermarries, there's always a potential to amplify certain genetic disorders. And, as a long-time professor of medicine and a teacher at the bedside, I keep in my back pocket, so to speak, a collection of sort of rare diseases. And when there is a quiet or dull moment on the ward, I might turn to one of the interns or medical students and ask them a question. It's almost in the form of a riddle. And so this particular condition that I made use of in the book is a known entity. It's very rare, where people drown for no understandable reason in shallow bodies of water because they completely lose their bearing. And so when I was writing the book, and as it became evident how much water is really the great connector in Kerala, the great circulatory system that keeps everybody, connected, and the monsoon every year is the great beating heart of the system, and the backwaters and lakes and canals are the circulatory system. It just seemed to me introducing a condition where the people afflicted would really stand out, especially in Kerala, because when you don't swim in Kerala, you're really quite an exception, given that there's water all around you. So that's really how I came up with the condition.
There's also a lot of loss in the book. I mean, there is, of course, love, but there is loss and love. Do you see that as a continuous cycle of life? This cycle of loss and love?
Well, I think that I hear that a lot, that my book has a lot of tragic events in it. But I don't think that I am doing something that's not reflective of life, especially life in the time that I was describing. I mentioned one of my grandmothers lost her husband very young from a very treatable condition now. She lost a son to rabies, which is also preventable. My other grandmother lost her only son. She had 3 daughters and a son. She lost her only son at the age of 12 to typhoid fever. So I think loss was very, very real in that era, and it is now today. I think as a physician, I'm very, very conscious of that. I'm very conscious of what I see in the hospital that most people are not aware of, which is that we are mortal human beings. Life is a terminal condition. None of us gets to live forever, which I think is part of its beauty. I mean, if you had a rose, if you have a rose that never blooms, withers, and dies, then if roses lived forever, they would be like weeds. They would not be the beautiful things they are. And part of their beauty is their evanescent nature. And I think that's very much true of life. So I'm not sure that I'm representing death and tragedy more than than is real. I just think that many physicians are much more aware of the potential for life being cut short than most other people. And I think the flip side of that is love. I think that when you are conscious of how brief our existence is, how transient, our moments are, this moment with you, is precious. It's happening right now, but then it's gone. I think the flip side of that is love, just a great desire to express your affection and your gratitude for the moment. And so I think these are all very real entities, especially in that era, but even today.
I think which is why Baby Mole's character is so enduring, because she lives in the here and now, and she'll always remain a 5-year-old no matter what. I know I'm giving out some spoilers, but and you talk about that in her character, that she's always happy, and she, when Dr. Doom diagnoses what she has and says that your child will always remain a child no matter how old she is. So I think that's what you're saying now, to live in the here and now, and that's why she was eternally happy and went happy.
Yeah, I think that's very true. In fact, I was inspired by one of my nieces. One of my nieces, is autistic, and she has issues that are it's a blessing. I've always thought, my mother always thought, that she was given my brother and his wife as her parents, because God put her in the right place. And the great blessing of my niece Amaya is that she always lives in the now. There is no future, there is no past, there is just the now. And she's so completely engaged in it. It's been a humbling lesson for all of us. You just think about how much time you and I spend not living in the now, worrying about what happened yesterday and what we got to do next. And she is spared that. So in many ways, I think she was a inspiration for that quality of Baby Mole, although Baby Mole has a very different condition than my niece.
How did your ambition to become a writer come about? And do you view the world through the lens of being a doctor, or are you looking at it from the perspective of being a writer? Or do these two merge, and is there a blurring line somewhere?
I never set out to be a writer. I fell in love with the idea of medicine very, very young because of a book. And I think that was true of a generation of physicians, that we were called to medicine because of a novel or a book that somehow made this seem a romantic and passionate pursuit, which is how I still feel about it. So I really had no further ambition than just to be a physician. But then when I finished my training in infectious diseases, internal medicine, and then infectious diseases in 1985, I moved from Boston to a small town in Tennessee. And mind you, this was the height of the HIV epidemic in the big cities. And when I moved to this small town, everyone said that because this was a small rural town, I could expect to see one HIV infected patient every other year, perhaps, because AIDS was considered very much an urban disease. And instead of that, in a very short time, I was following almost 100 people with HIV infection in a town of 50,000. It was an extraordinary number. And I felt that I'd stumbled onto a paradigm that was happening in every small town in America. And the paradigm was one of migration. And it goes like this: a young man grows up in a small town and leaves for all the same reasons you and I leave small towns. They leave for jobs, for education, for adventure. But in their case, these young men were also leaving because they were gay and they didn't want to live that lifestyle under the close scrutiny of their friends and relatives. And so they went to the big city, lived there for decades, had wonderful, flourishing careers. And then at some point, the virus found them. The HIV virus found them. And typically, their partners got ill and they nursed them until they died. And now they were getting sick. And so they were retreating to their hometowns. And I wrote a scientific paper describing this phenomenon of migration. It was a very popular, well-cited scientific paper because it really explained what was happening not just in my town, but every small town in America. And I felt at the time that the language of science did not begin to capture the tragic nature of this voyage. It did not begin to capture the heartbreak for the family. I didn't begin to
I'm
capture
sorry,
my
I think
own...
the connection's been.
I'm sorry, you're not hearing me?
I think I lost you in the middle there where you said that the language of science.
Yeah, the language of science did not begin to capture the tragic nature of this voyage. It didn't begin to capture the heartbreak of the families, nor did it capture my own grief at watching this happen again and again with young men who were mostly my age, who came under my care and then died. So I think that desire to tell that story was the moment that I became a writer.
How much did that move you, that episode when you were serving as a young doctor in a rural setting in Tennessee, and you are in the midst of this HIV epidemic, and there is not as much knowledge as there is now. The resources are fewer, I would presume. How much of that has shaped you into the writer that you are today?
Oh, I think that was definitely the defining moment of my life as a physician, but also as a human being, because I think when you're that young, you feel like this is going to go on forever, and all of a sudden I was dealing with a fatal illness in mostly young men my age at the time, and the impulse to write the book also came because many of these young men, the gay men, were incredibly wise. They had more courage than most heterosexual men that I'd ever met, and they had also enjoyed their life. They'd not waited to travel to do all the things that gay men had sort of such a wonderful appreciation for all aspects of life that really made me feel, as a heterosexual, that my frame was very narrow. And part of what they were teaching me was, don't postpone your dreams. If you want to do something, don't wait for some magical moment when it's all going to come together. And so it was really that experience that gave me the courage to write the book, to take some time off, a sabbatical, kind of a risky thing to do. I gave up my job and dragged my young family to Iowa to work on writing this book, the first book, My Own Country. And, I think that was what set me up to be a writer. And yeah, I think very much AIDS was the defining moment of my life, just as for many young physicians right now. COVID was their defining moment. They sort of came through a war. I was there. I was also on the front lines, but not like them. They were much more engaged. They were, you know, on the very front lines. I was more in a supervisory role. So, yeah, I think that that was clearly the defining moment of my life, not just to become a writer, but to sort of change the way I looked at life as a human being.
Now,
Now,
writing is a
writing is a
very
very
solitary
solitary
process.
process.
Usually,
Usually,
you are
you are
writing
writing
alone
alone
with your
with
own
your own
thoughts. You're
thoughts. You're
waiting for
waiting for
inspiration. I don't
inspiration.
know
I
if
don't know
you're
if you're
waiting for
waiting for
a moment
a
for
moment for
inspiration to
inspiration to
strike.
strike.
How much
How much
does it
does it
take
take
away from
away from
you as
you
a
as a
person when
person
you're
when
the
you're the
writer?
writer?
As much
As
as it
much as
gives
it gives
back to
back to
us
us
as the
as the
readers,
readers?
how much
How
of
much
it
of it
does it
does
take
it take
away?
away?
Does it
Does
chip
it chip
away at
away at
you?
you?
Like
Like
every
every
book, does
book,
it
does
take
it take
away
away
something from
something from
you?
you?
Well, every book is a is an ordeal of sorts, especially this one. This one took 14 years to write. Partly because there was a lot going on in my day-to-day job, but more than that, I really struggled to find the story. I had to switch publishers. I was with a publisher who was getting impatient, and I felt that didn't really understand the story, and so I broke my contract with them, and I have to pay back. I still have to pay back the advance that they gave me. So, and then I had to shop around for another publisher, and by this time, the book was tainted. It was almost as though I had been there for my wedding. At the last moment something goes wrong and you don't marry. It had that sort of tainted quality, and so I was very happy to find a publisher, and all I wanted was to see it get into print. So the fact that it's been as successful as it has been, both here and in India, is just such a amazing blessing. But so the highs for every book always come with the lows. There's a lot of solitary work, as you said. I also think that writing is, in its own way, an incredibly selfish act. I have given up on a lot of things, a lot of social things, because I'm writing, and people don't really appreciate that. I mean, I always think that if I was a neurosurgeon and said, "I'm sorry, I have to leave dinner right now. I can't be at this party because I have to go operate on a brain," everybody understands. Nobody questions you. But if you say, "Sorry, I can't come to your party because I'm writing," it's like, well, okay, be that way, So as a writer, you deal with a lot of deferred pleasure, if you like, because you have the story that you're compelled to tell, and that becomes so important that it is a very selfish thing to be engaged in. And what can you do once you get the bug to write a
Would
particular
you?
story? Then you're hooked.
Yes, and I'm so
Yes, and
glad
I'm
that
so
you
glad that
continued
you
in the
continue
journey
in the
because
journey
we're
because
all
we're
hooked
all
to
hooked
the Covenant
to
of
the
Water and
Covenant of
all
Water and all
the new books
the
that you're
new
going to
books that you're
write
going
and
to
that we're going
write
to
and that
read.
we're going to
Would
read.
you ever
Would you
consider
ever
leaving
consider
medicine for
leaving medicine
writing
for
now
writing
that
now that
you're known
you're known
around the world
around the world
as a
as
writer?
a writer?
We are talking
We are
today
talking
because
today
you're a
because you're
writer.
a writer.
Would you ever
Would you
consider
ever
leaving
consider
medicine?
leaving medicine?
I don't think so. I mean, I feel like people love to give me two hats. I wear a doctor's hat and a writer's hat, but I don't see it that way. I mean, I see myself as all physician in the sense that I'm looking at the world through the lens of a physician, and I'm seeing things that through that lens. The only difference between me and other physicians, perhaps, is that I'm expressing some of the same emotions that all of us in medicine feel. But more than that, I think I love teaching medicine. I love seeing patients. I love, the sort of the intellectual variety every single day. But that said, I mean, I've been doing it for a long, long time. I'm getting to an age where I will probably sort of be cutting back on a few things. But, I think it was always scary for me to think of just dropping medicine and becoming a writer. I suppose I could have done that a long time ago, but I would have always worried that if I left medicine, I wouldn't have much to say, or that I would lose this particular lens. I mean, I don't think that that's true. But yeah, so maybe one day as I get older, I might in fact be doing much less medicine and more writing. But for the moment, I love doing both. It also takes some pressure off the writing. I think I have a lot of writer friends for whom everything depends on the next book. Getting the kids through college, and everything is about producing the next book and it doing well. And I've been very blessed. Don't get me wrong, I wanted all my books to do well. But if they didn't succeed, I would be fine. I have a job that I love, and I would be quite happy. So, when I'm asked by other writers, young writers, to give them advice, one of the things I say, and I think they think I'm being facetious, but I'm not, is I always say, get a good day job that you love, because there's nothing harder and nothing puts more pressure on your writing than for your whole livelihood to depend on it. And if it does, then you are in for a real struggle unless you're extraordinarily lucky. I mean, I've been lucky with my writing, I've done well, but the books have been so infrequent that had I tried to make a living out of it, I don't think I would have made a very good living.
Has it ever been a struggle though? The
Well,
whole
you mean,
process of writing? I mean, you have a day job. You said you don't have the pressures that probably someone who is writing to make ends meet and, for whom this is the main bread and butter. But have you ever felt a struggle in being a writer? Was there ever a struggle in getting a book out?
oh, definitely. I think every book is a little bit of a battle because, you don't know how it's going to be received. You don't even know what you're about to write. So I'm afraid I'm not one of these writers who knows the whole story beforehand. There are writers like John Irving, who is a friend of mine. John knows the beginning and the end of the book before he starts writing. He knows the first sentence of every chapter before he starts writing. And so, when he sits down to write, there are still exciting things that might happen, but he pretty much knows the story. Then there are writers like Michael Ondaatje, who I've also gotten to know. And I think his process is very much like mine, is that I have a feeling, a mood, a theme that I begin with, and then gradually I expand on it. And at some point, way into the process, I can finally see the whole story. And once I know what's going to happen, then I can go back and, fix it to make it resonate and echo. But, so that part is always a struggle, but it's sort of a delightful struggle. You're breaking your head on what is the story, where is this going to end. And when I look back on this book, the things that I will remember, of course I'll remember magical moments like this, talking to you, but I especially remember those sort of solitary moments where I'm breaking my head against the book day after day, and suddenly, from God knows where, call it the muse, call it the right brain, call it angels, you suddenly have an idea that comes to you, and as it comes to you, you also know this is going to work, that it resonates as being truthful to you, and therefore you hope for the reader. And that feeling is just magical, and I think it's what keeps you going. But so yeah, I think it's always a struggle. It's not been a financial struggle because I've been able to pay the bills by my day job, but nevertheless, the act of writing, once you have published one book, then you become much more self-conscious. It's no longer this pleasure, I'm going to go write in the evenings and I love to write, it's my hobby. It becomes much more mannered, it becomes much more, it becomes work, albeit a different kind of work than what I do in the daytime.
I've been told we have 5 minutes to wrap. I'm just going to try and squeeze in last two questions. Now, the women in the storybook are such powerful characters, whether it's Bigamati, whether it's Celeste, or whether it's Elsie, or whether it's Mariama. Are you surrounded by strong women? Where are you getting the inspiration? Because this is from 1900 to 1977. And I remember this verse where Mariama is talking to Bigamati, and Bigamati tells her that, you are from Parambal, you're a woman, you can do anything. And this is Bigamati who got married at 12 and went to someone else's house. Where is this courage and fortitude coming from?
Well, I think, I have been blessed to be around really strong women. And when I think of my grandmothers, and I think all of us know women like this, they are, unheralded by the world, unknown to the world, and yet they are the rock that keeps the family together. They are the glue that, survives all the tragedies, all the hardships, and what keeps them going is their faith, their belief, and everybody around them draws strength from that. So Yeah, I think I think I really wanted to pay tribute to the quality that I think, women have, much more so than men, but especially mothers, grandmothers, where, they become the rock, the pillar of a family in a way that's quite amazing. And so I think it was very deliberate on my part to try and pay tribute to characters who were very real in my life. And so, yeah, I think it's been a great blessing to be able to have people like that in my life, my grandmothers and many other strong, strong women, my mother, and to somehow find that that also resonates with readers. I mean, I have had many readers write back to me, and I think Big Amachi's character in particular is someone that affects them, not because she's extraordinary, but because they recognize elements of her in people in their lives, like their own grandmothers or mothers. And so I think that it's been very gratifying to see that that came about, that the thing I was trying to do became real to other people.
Thank you, Dr. Varghese, for your time. I know I have been stalking you on Instagram and in person. I remember coming across The Coming to Water when Oprah first talked about it in her book club, and I remember pre-ordering the book and getting the book in May 2023. And after reading it, I was so delighted and I was so enthralled that I just couldn't get enough of this world. I had to go out and get Cotton for Stone. I hadn't read any of your books before that. And I remember sending you a message on Instagram, and you were so gracious. You actually responded, and you replied to me. And I recently met you at the Bangalore Literature Festival, and you were very kind, and you signed my copy of the book, The Coming to Water. Before I let you go, one last question in Malayalam. അടുത്ത ബുക്ക് നമുക്ക് എപ്പോഴാ പ്രതീക്ഷിക്കാൻ പറ്റാ?
I first of all, thank you so much for taking the time from your busy schedule to come and interview me. I'm really honored. I must say the reception in Kerala for the book has just been especially gratifying, because I was very worried that my fellow Malayalis would say, what is this fellow living in America going to write about Kerala? And I was prepared for a lot of critical reaction. So the positive reaction has been just beautiful to me, very, very satisfying. Out of the book, I can't think of another book right now. I really feel like I gave so much to this book. It's going to take some time to feel like I can write another book. And I know I will write, but I just don't know when or what shape it will take. But can I also say thank you to Govind and DC Books and all your wonderful folks at the Kerala Book Festival for putting this all together. It's quite a feat to connect us over so many miles in different time zones. And so I'm really thrilled to have been here. Thank you for having me.
Can we hope to see you in person next year at KLF?
I hope so. I mean, I have...
You can give me that commitment.
I would love to come back soon.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for everyone. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.